Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala thumma amma ba'd. To proceed, inshallah, today we have Babu al-Ilm, the chapter on knowledge, and Babu Ikhraj al-Zakah and Fiqh, which is the chapter of paying zakat. In Bab al-Ilm, or the chapter of knowledge, Imam al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala said, قال الله عز وجل وعلمناه من لدنا علما. Allah Almighty said, and we had taught him from us a certain knowledge. We have taught him from us. Min ladunna means from us, directly. And you must be aware of this particular verse. It's in Surah Al-Kahf. It's about al-Khadir. It's about the story of Musa and al-Khadir. When Musa was instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to seek al-Khadir, and Allah told him that we have taught him from us. Meaning not through you, directly from us. And that is why this is called the Baysam al-Ilm al-Ladunni. Ilm al-Ladunni does not mean much from Ladunna, it just means from us. But it, an adjective was made out of it. And that is fine as long as we correctly understand what it means. And as Ibn Hajar said, that it would be essential to believe in the prophethood of al-Khadir in order to basically refute any blasphemy or heresy that would, or heretics that would use the story of al-Khadir as a pretext for violating the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and basically creating a dichotomy between al-Haqiqa and al-Sharia, creating like a divorce between al-Haqiqa, the truth, the spiritual truth, which they claim to be inspired of directly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Sharia, the way of the Prophet ﷺ that he instructed us in, that was conveyed to us in the Quran and the Sunnah, and understood by the righteous predecessors, transmitted by the great Imams and their counterparts. So, وَعَلَمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا here means we have taught him from us directly a certain knowledge, a knowledge of certainty, a clear knowledge, certain knowledge. And al-Khadir was taught certainly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is nice to go over the story of al-Khadir because it has has sort of like a form of instantiation of the answer of the problem of evil. And that's the way of the Quran, darb al-amthila, given parables and examples, because instantiation, to make instances of certain concepts, or to crystallize certain concepts by providing instances or examples, parables. That is certainly much easier for people to learn and to grasp. And the problem of evil is answered in the story of al-Khadir. If you think what you saw is evil, and if you were particularly taken aback by what you have seen me do, then here is the explanation, the master plan. What you have seen is only what you can see from your angle, from your perspective, which is basically limited. But here is part of the master plan. I will not, al-Khadir said to Musa, that your knowledge and my knowledge and the knowledge of everyone else is like this bird, picking a drop of water from the ocean, or like actually pushing down their beak into the ocean. See what they get out of it. That's the knowledge of all people compared to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Basically another instantiation by al-Khadir. So al-Khadir told them that, part of the master plan that you have not been able to see is that behind this ship there was this king, tyrannical king who used to wrongfully seize all good ships, and he wanted to basically ruin the ship or create a visible defect in the ship so that that king would be disinterested in it, would not want it. And the rest of the story, the boy that was killed by al-Khadir and the jidar, the wall that he erected. And he explained to him why he did everything. So al-Khadir may have been a prophet, but at the same time, Musa was not sent to all humanity, and that is something that we should be aware of, that Musa alayhi salam was sent to Bani Israel, not to the entire humanity. Unlike the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was sent to the al-Jinn al-Ins, entire humanity, and even Jinn. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, and we have not sent you but as a mercy for all creations, basically. But certainly when it comes to the message to all liable creatures. So that's something important that's important to point out here. Then the Sheikh started by defining knowledge. And usually you want to start with the definition and classification, and then, like if it is a fiqh or something related to fiqh, you will go over the definition and classification first, and then the rulings afterwards. So everything that, but everything, you need to start with the definition. You need to define what you're talking about. So he said here, العلم ما قام بدليل ورفع الجهل وهو على ثلاث درجات. العلم ما قام بدليل, knowledge is that which is established through evidence, ورفع الجهل, and erased ignorance. رفع, erased, جهل, ignorance. وهو على ثلاث درجات, and it is of 3 levels. So العلم ما قام بدليل ورفع الجهل. Knowledge is whatever that is established on evidence, or by evidence, or through evidence, and it erases ignorance. Now that's the definition of the Shaykh. Certainly this is not a book of mantiq, it is not a book of logic, it is not a book of usul al-fiqh or principles of jurisprudence. This is a tazkiyah book. So you don't want to be too particular about, technicalities, right? The people and the masters of tazkiyah, they don't worry much about technicalities because the benefit of the heart is the ultimate objective in their own discipline or tariqah. The benefit of the heart is what they're after. But since the Sheikh started, and I don't want to turn this into an epistemology class, but since the Sheikh started by the definition, and then the Sheikh will also, when he talks about the Daraj al-Ula, he will talk about how knowledge is established, and we will come to it. But since the Sheikh started, then we will have to also shed some light on the definition of knowledge and what knowledge is. So, Abjad al-Ulum by al-Allama Siddiq Hassan Khan, is like a very sort of remarkable book by al-Allama Siddiq Hassan Khan rahimahullah. It's called the Abjad al-Ulum, the ABCs of knowledge. You could say that. You could translate it as the ABCs of knowledge. And in Abjad al-Ulum, he basically quoted 17 different definitions of knowledge. And these are all our definitions from our sort of heritage, from our Turath. He quoted 17 different definitions of knowledge, and it would be a pleasure to actually go over the definitions and see why he did not accept any of the 17 definitions. The discussion itself tells you about how to craft a definition, because crafting a definition is extremely is a serious business. It's not that easy. To define something is pretty serious. So to read his refutation of the 17 definitions, not refutation necessarily, but his reservations, his ma'akhidh on the 17 different definitions would be nice. One of the definitions, I'll give you just one definition that he basically had some issues with. and one definition that he eventually accepted. So the definition that he had an issue with was the definition of Imam al-Razi, where he defined knowledge as الاعتقاد الجازم المطابق لموجب إما ضروري أو نظري. And we will come back to it when we talk a little bit more from an epistemological perspective on the acquisition of knowledge. So he said it is the الاعتقاد الجازم. Do you know how they define knowledge in English, or the Western definition of knowledge is true justified belief? Up until Khadir, basically had his own reservations against the definition, and they started to discuss the definition all over again. But it has been established that the definition of knowledge is true justified belief. True justified belief. But Imam Razi said الاعتقاد الجازم المطابق لموجب إما ضروري وإما نظري. So الاعتقاد is belief, الجازم certain, المطابق consistent, basically consistent with what? Consistent with the reality. So you don't only have a belief, but it is a true belief. True meaning consistent with the reality. It matches the reality. Your belief matches the reality. So الاعتقاد الجازم المطابق لموجب means justifiable. True justified. So mujib meaning a justifier, something that justifies this knowledge, evidence, proof that justifies your knowledge. So even if you have knowledge that is correct, consistent with the reality, but it is not justified, that's not considered knowledge. To just know something without justification is not considered knowledge until you know it with its justification. So الاعتقاد الجازم المطابق لموجب إما ضروري وإما نظري. It's either ضروري, and we will come back to the definition of ضروري, or نظري. These are basically classification of different types of knowledge, and we will come back to them. Or maybe we just talk about them now. Al-Allama al-Akhdari rahimahullah mentioned he basically had 3 verses in his manzuma, in his poem on mantiq. It's called the Sullam al-Munawraq. As-Sullam al-Munawraq. It's about logic. And then in this he said about the different types of knowledge. إدراك مفرد تصورا علم ودرك نسبة بتصديق وسم وقدم الأول عند الوضع لأنه مقدم في الطبع والنظر محتاج للتأمل وعكسه هو الضروري الجلي. So idrak means what? Idrak means realization. And most of this translation is not mine, but I tweaked it a little bit, modified it a little bit. Idraku mufradin. Mufrad is an individual object. Individual object. Tasawwuran ulim is known as conception. That is one type of knowledge. What he's talking here, he's basically telling us about the different types of temporal knowledge, al-ilm al-hadith, which is temporal knowledge. Temporal knowledge is versus what? Temporal knowledge. Because we have two different types of knowledge at the first bifurcation. The first bifurcation is we have al-ilm al-qadim, which is the pre-existent knowledge. That's the knowledge of God. That's the divine knowledge. It's called al-ilm al-qadim, pre-existent knowledge. Al-ilm al-hadith is temporal knowledge. That's our knowledge, temporal knowledge. So he's talking here about al-ilm al-hadith or temporal knowledge, and all of this is about al-ilm al-hadith. First type of it is tasawwur, conception. Conception. When you say ice is cold, ice is cold. This is a preposition, right? But this preposition, what we think of knowledge usually is what? Is basically the answer to this through affirmation or negation. Assertion. Assertion of the preposition based on evidence. You say, yes, ice is cold based on such and such evidence. No, ice is not cold. And ice is cold is just like the simplest preposition here. A cat is an animal. Preposition. So, ice is cold. But the tasawwur that he's talking about here, which is the realization of individual objects, known as tasawwur, is basically the tasawwur of ice itself. The individual object, your conception of the individual object, your conception of coldness. In order for you to say, yes, ice is cold or ice is not cold, do you need to know what iceness is about, what coldness is about, right? Before you judge the predication, judge the relationship, judge the nisbah, you have to first have a conception of iceness, of coldness, of catness. These are the Platonic forms, basically the forms and the particulars. A cat is a particular, but there is a form for catness, that will make you identify every cat as a cat, despite their different looks and their different sizes and the different everything. That which is in common, between them. So this is called conception. We said the ilm qadim and ilm hadith. The ilm hadith is divided into conception and this wadarku. Dark is also realization. Realization. Nisbatin. Nisba is predication. Predication. The relationship. Nisba means a relation. A relationship between iceness and coldness. So realization of that predication. بتصديق وسم. وسم was called تصديق. تصديق is what? تصديق means affirmation. Affirmation. Let us use, instead of affirmation, assertion, because this is used more in English. Assertion. So it is called assertion. So you have conception and you have assertion. Conception is your realization of individual objects. Coldness, catness, iceness, that realization of what that means, what this is about, is important. And then the predication is basically to affirm or negate the relation or the tie between the subject and the predicate. The subject and the predicate. Then he said, Allama al-Akhdari rahimahullah said, وَقَدِّمِ الْأَوَّلَ عِنْدَ الْوَضْعِ. قَدِّم, give precedence. Or first, or start with. Start with. Start with the first. أول عند الوضع in conventional use or conventional usage. Start with the first in conventional usage لأنه مقدم في الطبع, because it is naturally first, because it comes first. مقدم, it is given precedence. في الطبع, طبع naturally, so it naturally comes first, right? Tasawwur, conception, comes before assertion. You have to have tasawwur of what a cat is, or what catness is about, what iceness is about, what humanity is about, and then you will have to basically make the assertion about the certain attributes or certain descriptions, propositions. Then, so we have now we have qadim and hadith. Hadith is tasawwur and tasdeeq. And then this tasawwur and tasdeeq, each one of them comes in two different types. There is tasawwur that is daruri and nadhari. And when nadhari means what? Nadhari, well, some people would translate this as theoretical, but it's not theoretical. It is basically, whatever requires nadhar. Nadhar is examination, nadhar is investigation, nadhar is sort of reflection. Whatever requires ta'ammul. وَالنَّظَرِ مَحْتَاجَ لِلتَّأَمُّلِ. So the acquired knowledge is whatever needed, needed للتأمل, reflection. وعكسه, the opposite of it, هو الضروري الجلي, is الضروري. الضروري would be translated, usually translated as necessary, right? But it's really not necessary. It's not necessary, because the word darura itself is about what? It comes from darar, from harm. And we say this is daruri, or this is daruri means necessary, because if I don't have it, I will be subject to harm. Daruri here, if you use Aristotle's terminology, Aristotle referred to this when when you ask Aristotle about Aristotle's logic was about syllogism. Syllogistical reasoning is Aristotle's sort of own way of acquiring knowledge. But the first premises, before you make that analogy, the first premises, how do you reach the first premises? He said that this is irresistible knowledge. Irresistible. So daruri is irresistible. Irresistible. Jali is self-evident. Self-evident. So now you have, and then we will talk about the difference between this and that. So you have the qadim, pre-existent, and you have the hadith, the temporal. Ours is the temporal, so let's talk about ours. Temporal is either tasawwur, which is conception, and tasdeeq, which is assertion. Each one of them will be nazari, which is acquired through reflection. Through reflection. Or daruri, which is irresistible. irresistible. You can't, you just, you know. So here, acquired, irresistible. Example on acquired through reflection when it comes to conception. Can you give an example on acquired through reflection when it comes to conception and irresistible when it comes to conception? Irresistible when it comes to the conception is basically the presence of a distance between me and you. You know. Well, let's start with the assertion first. Acquired, you know, the assertions. What is acquired and what's irresistible? Irresistible when it comes to assertion would be like what the difference between 1 and 2. 1 is half of 2, right? This is not a conception, this is an assertion. There is a predication here. 1 is half of 2. Acquired through reflection, when you say that 25 is 100 divided by 20 multiplied by 5. Right? 25, 100 divided. Did it take you time to think about it? Yes. You're honest. Someone here may. Okay. It took you a little time. But did it take you time to think about 1 is half of 2? No. And you can't even resist it. And no matter what your education is, you can't resist it. Irresistible when it comes to conception is oneness. The idea of oneness itself. Oneness versus multiplicity. You know, that idea itself. You have to have that conception. In order for you to talk about 1, you have to have a conception of what 1 is. Singularity. You have to have a conception of singularity, right? And this is irresistible conception. Irresistible conception. And then there are other conceptions that are acquired through reflection. You know, and sometimes they would be conceptions of the nature of paradise. Unless you're told, you can't really tell, you know. And then it's whatever it is that you're told, your conception is acquired through basically knowledge that is transmitted, but it is not irresistible. It is not around you, it is not irresistible. Now it becomes a certain knowledge when it comes to you through certainty. Certainty. And that is what we will address when we get to the means of acquiring knowledge. Means of acquiring knowledge that the Sheikh will get to now. So now, Imam al-Razi said al-i'tiqad al-jazim al-mutabiq li-mujab, daruri or nadhari. And why did Allama Siddiq Hassan Khan refused that definition? He said, because if we want to define knowledge, we want to define all sorts of knowledge. And in this case, al-i'tiqad itself would not be the right word to use when it comes to al-ilm al-qadim, or the pre-existent knowledge, or the knowledge of Allah. When it comes to the pre-existent knowledge or the knowledge of Allah. al-i'tiqad al-jazim al-mutabiq li-mujab, daruri or daruri or nazari. The definition that he chose at the end, is the definition of Imam Shawkani. And the definition was الصفة التي ينكشف بها المطلوب انكشافا كاملا. It is the quality by which basically al-matlub, the conclusion, is disclosed, completely disclosed. the conclusion is completely disclosed. Quality by which the conclusion is completely disclosed. Many times when they define knowledge by defining that which is known, but in order, which creates like a circle, like a closed circle, and that is something that you want to avoid. But at any rate, we have all of these different types of knowledge. We have the temporal, the hadith, the pre-existent, the qadim. We have the conception, al-tasawwur, and assertion, al-tasdeeq. We have acquired through reflection, and nadari, and irresistible, which is daruri. But how do you acquire all of that knowledge? And the Sheikh said here, الدرجة الأولى علم جلي يقع بعيان واستفاضة صحيحة أو صحة تجربة قديمة. الدرجة الأولى علم جلي. And certainly the Sheikh does not mean to make this an epistemological discussion like we're doing it now, but since he addressed those issues. الدرجة الأولى علم جلي. The first level is apparent, exterior knowledge. يقع بعيان, which is established through eyesight. واستفاضة صحيحة, true concurrence. أو صحة تجربة قديمة, or validated experimentation. So 3 ways here that he mentioned for the acquisition of knowledge. And, people that this is one of the biggest controversies in philosophy in general, and epistemology in particular. Between the people who said that we are born with whatever knowledge we have built in, and those are the rationalists, or the innatists, in reference to innate knowledge, like Socrates, Plato, Descartes. And then the people who say that we are born with a blank slate, tabula rasa, like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and the empiricists, John Locke, and all of the empiricist philosophers. And we then acquire knowledge. For the empiricist, it is acquired through experimentation, which is honestly the right way of acquiring knowledge of the material, the physical knowledge. Certainly it would not be of much use in metaphysics or acquiring knowledge of the unseen. The other one was actually better that we had there. The eraser. Not the board, the eraser. So Sheikh said here 3 different ways of acquiring knowledge. He said يقع بعيان واستفاضة صحيحة أو صحة تجربة قديمة. عيان is eyesight. استفاضة صحيحة is true concurrence. Don't Abu Ayyub, where is he going? You want to get the eraser. Tell him I'm done here. I'm going to stop now. وصحة تجربة قديمة, validated experiment or validated experimentation. Sit down. Validated experiment. And if you think about it and you add a few things also, you will get a complete picture of how knowledge is acquired. Eyesight, add to eyesight all other senses. True concurrence, which is istifada. True concurrence, by the way, someone may say we have, billions of people saying that Jesus was the Son of God. You can't get any better concurrence than this, right? What is the initial premise of the concurrence? A belief transmitted belief. That is not an acceptable premise. That is not a certain premise. If the billions of people did actually see something and reported it, and it is impossible that they would all concur on lying, then that is valid, a valid way to certainty. Like, so many people go to China and come back talking to us about what they saw in China. You can't resist believing them. You just can't. You know, like everybody comes and talks to you, you know, I went to China and there's a country called China. You can't resist believing that there is a country called China. You've never been to it. And nowadays you watch it on TV, but prior to TV, people still could not resist, you know, that knowledge, that certain knowledge of the existence of China. They've never been to China, but so many people came to them and told them, you know, about China that it became irresistible knowledge. So true concurrence, then the premise has to be, like eyesight, has to be a certain premise, not just a belief, a transmitted belief. Because all of those people, someone claimed that he saw Jesus come back after, you know, after they claimed that he was crucified, or they thought he was crucified. So all of this, and then you know, you had 300 years later the Conference of Nicaea, and then people gathered, and Constantine decided that we will go with the divinity of Jesus versus, you know, him being just like an apostle or a messenger of God or a prophet, or so. And then when people accepted this, and then they transmitted generation after generation, you can't say that this is true concurrence. This is basically transmitted, and then after it was transmitted, many people believed it, but at the root of it, no, there were not like hundreds of people seeing that Jesus is the Son of God to begin with, or seeing that he came back, or seeing that he was actually the one to be crucified. But at any rate, true concurrence then is add to true concurrence. Add to true concurrence certain transmission. Because true concurrence, why is it that you believe that China exists even though you've never been to China? Because the corroboration of different reports made that knowledge reach the level of certainty, a level of certainty, right, in your mind, corroboration of reports. But what if one person that is certainly truthful told you China exists? One person. But that one person has established his truthfulness, a messenger of God with miracles, and established their truthfulness and told you paradise exists. That, you know, based on the miracles that they established, that knowledge is superior to China exists. Superior to China exists, based on the knowledge. And based also on ad-darura, which is the concept being an irresistible concept, that we must have come from some place for some purpose. And there is more purpose to us than just being, you know, the matter that we are made of. There is more to us than just the matter that we are made of. All of this, and then a messenger comes and establishes proofs on their truthfulness, then that results in certain knowledge. And then validated experiment. And validated experiment is basically experimentation, experimental method, the experimental method. But add to the experimental method, which is something that you basically need your intellect for, two other methods that would establish knowledge, which are induction and deduction. Induction and deduction. Istinbat and istiqra. Induction and deduction. Deduction. Induction and deduction. So if you add to the eyesight that the Sheikh here, the senses, if you add true concurrence, certain transmission, or from a truthful reporter, and if you add to the experimental method, induction and deduction, then you have all sources of knowledge combined here. What about this dichotomy between innate and acquired? Is it innate or acquired? What does Islam say about this? Or what can we understand? And always, to say that this is what Islam says is also just too big of a claim. But what is it that we understand from, the text of revelation from the Quran and the Sunnah? It is not actually innatist or blank slatist. It is somewhere in the middle, or it has aspects of both. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nahl, and this is the verse of epistemology in Islam. وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ What does that mean? Allah brought you out min from butun, wombs. It means bellies, but it means here wombs. Ummahatikum, your mothers. لا تعلمون شيئا. La meaning knowing nothing. لا تعلمون شيئا meaning knowing nothing. Knowing nothing. Here you go. Why do you need to go any further? Then the Quran supports the blank slate, or as you tabiyul raza concept. Knowing nothing. Blank slate. Here. What? Fitra? Yeah, but we're talking about the means of acquiring knowledge, temporal knowledge. I will come to it. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. And He made for you, Sam'a is hearing. Absar is eyesight, sight. And that's in reference to the senses. Because the Quran does not, the Quran gives the references, that you extrapolate from, in reference to the senses. Wal af'ida. Al-af'ida is what? Intellects. And here is the crux of the matter. So all of this up until here, and if you stopped in the Quran, is certainly empirical. He's talking about empirical theory here. But tabiyur raza, you came out knowing nothing, and then you have hearing and eyesight. So you see, you observe, you experiment, and you acquire knowledge through this. And all of this is correct. But this af'ida part, that is where the innatist could claim that there is some mention here of innate knowledge. But this innate knowledge is not ready knowledge. This innate knowledge is what? is a potential, a capacity, a potency, just potency, ability, but not merely a potential or capacity. There are some basic foundations, the forms that no one knew how. That's the thing that bewildered philosophers. So when you see a cat and you just say this is a cat, and you see another cat of a different size, a different shape, and you say this is these forms, for Plato, these were transcendent. They had nothing to do with the material world. For Aristotle, these forms were mixed with the material world. But how do you get to that? How are you able to realize this catness, this iceness, this coldness? And basically, these are the building blocks, basic foundations that are inculcated into us. We are able, but this proves that there is a source beyond the material world. They're not just the transcendent forms of Plato, but there is a source beyond the material world. We came in with so much that is already built in al-af'ida, in the intellect. And yes, we have the hearing and eyesight to further acquire knowledge, particularly the knowledge of tasdeeq, the knowledge of assertion. But when it comes to the knowledge of conception, there is so much that is already built in. Singularity and multiplicity, that concept itself. You think that this is a no-brainer, right? This is not knowledge. You don't pay attention to it. You take it for granted. The difference between 1 and 2, you're taking it for granted. This was built into you. That is why you're taking it for granted. You did not need to acquire it. You did not need to go to school to learn that there is a difference between 1 and 2. But someone inculcated this in you. Someone, built this into your program. That there is a difference between 1 and 2. And there is a difference between singularity and multiplicity and all of these things. So then, epistemologically, the Quran does tell us that we have the building blocks of knowledge, some innate conceptions and building blocks of knowledge, but then the Quran points out to us also the importance of acquiring knowledge by using the senses. So Allah told us, I gave you the building blocks, I gave you the capacity, the potency, the potential, but I also gave you those senses so that you could go ahead and acquire more knowledge. So the Sheikh says here, الدرجة الأولى علم جلي يقع بعيان واستفاضة صحيحة أو صحة تجربة قديمة. First level is apparent or exterior knowledge, which is established through eyesight or through concurrence or validated experimentation. And we added to eyesight all the senses. And we added to true concurrence a report of the truthful one that established their truth. And we added to صحة تجربة قديمة or valid experiment or the experimental method, knowledge that can be acquired through induction or deduction. Induction or deduction. And then we will not talk about the difference between induction and deduction and all of that stuff because it's enough epistemology for today. Let's get back to the Sheikh. والدرجة الثانية علم خفي. The second level is hidden interior knowledge. He says ينبت في الأسرار الطاهرة من الأبدان الزاكية بماء الرياضة الخالصة. It emanates in the purified secrets. Asrar, sir is secret. They refer to the subtlemost, innermost part of the soul. Subtlemost, innermost part of the soul. If the soul is the essence of the human, if your essence is, the soul is your essence. The essence of the soul is the sir. That's why they say, قَدَّسَ اللَّهُ سِرًّا. May Allah sanctify his sir, his secret. Basically the subtlemost, innermost part of the soul, or element of the soul. ينبت في الأسرار. So this knowledge, this hidden knowledge, it emanates in the purified secrets of the purified bodies, purified secrets, purified souls of the purified bodies. The bodies are purified by being compliant with the Sharia, and bodies that emanated from halal, eating halal, and being compliant with the Sharia, in conformity, congruity, harmony with the Sharia all the time. Those bodies, those souls in those bodies, then emanates in the purified secrets of the purified bodies by the purified water of spiritual disciplining or training, which is Ma'ariyad al-Khalisa, the purified water of spiritual disciplining or training. Do you remember the station of Riyada? We had the station of Riyada, spiritual training, spiritual disciplining, spiritual refinement. So if you are able to make your body compliant and feed yourself also, nurture your body only with that which is halal, and sanctify your soul by consistent refinement, discipline, to actualize your fullest potential in virtue and piety and so on, then you may be granted some of that al-ilm al-khafi, or the hidden knowledge that descends on the hearts. And then we will talk about the hidden knowledge and the fact that it is not in conflict with the apparent knowledge of Sharia. It only complements, never substitutes the apparent knowledge of Sharia. And then he said, وَيَظْهَرُ فِي الْأَنْفَاسِ الصَّادِقَةِ لِأَهْلِ الْهِمَّةِ الْعَالِيَةِ فِي الْأَحَيِّينِ الْخَالِيَةِ وَالْأَسْمَاعِ الصَّاخِيَةِ. ويظهر في الأنفاس الصادقة, and manifests in the sincere souls, لأهل الهمة العالية, with sincere souls with highest aspirations, in the unoccupied times of attentive listening, in the unoccupied times of attentive listening. Now, the qualified people were mentioned in the first point. Those are the qualified people, the people who purified their innermost souls, purified their bodies by refinement and so on. And then he said, he's talking about the opportunity now. These are the opportunities. Manifests in the sincere souls. You have to be very sincere in your pursuit of that knowledge, with highest aspirations, and you have to really be determined to reach it. In the unoccupied times, you should not allow anything to distract you from it. You should avoid distraction to all the ambient noise of the worldly pursuits, of occupied times of attentive listening, and you should pay attention, listen carefully to anything that listen means what here? Keep your heart open in general to lessons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send to you, that you will come across every moment of the day, every instance, every occasion. You're learning, you're listening, Allah is teaching you something. When you trip and fall, Allah is teaching you something. When you hear news, good news, bad news, there is always something to learn. But most of the time, we're not attentive. Asma' are not sakhiyah. The asma' are not paying attention. Asma' here is not just about the hearing. Asma' here is about basically reception, receptive. And then he said, وهو علم يظهر الغائب ويغيب الشاهد ويشير إلى الجمع. وهو علم يظهر الغائب, it is a knowledge that makes the unseen manifest. ويغيب الشاهد, and makes the manifest disappear. How is it that يظهر الغائب? What is الغائب? Al-Jannah and Nar and all of these things are unseen to you. This knowledge will make them manifest. كأني أرى أهل النار في النار يعذبون وأهل الجنة في الجنة ينعمون. As if I see the people in Jannah rejoicing. As if I see it. So, it has become so certain, as if I see. So يظهر الغائب, it makes manifest the unseen. ويغيب الشاهد, and shahid is the obvious, tangible and obvious. يغيب الشاهد and obscures, veils, or make disappear that which is obvious, that which is right in front of you. So you're seeing you're not seeing everybody here, and you're not seeing anyone at home. You're only beholding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, paying attention to Him only. ويشير إلى الجمع and points to the union. يشير إلى الجمع points to the union with Allah. Not in the Neoplatonic sense as we mentioned last time. You remember last time we mentioned the problem of, using terminology and the problem of using concepts that are foreign to us. We did not emanate from Allah so that we can reunite with Him in that sense. Union with Allah is union in purpose, when your purpose, your will, completely conforms to His will. You desire not but that which He desires. حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. None of you will have belief until his desire will be in complete conformity with that which I have brought forth. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. That conformity, that congruity between the divine will and your will is that union that they are talking about. Not union in the sense of reuniting with, the one from which everything proceeded by outflow and were emanated from by outflowing, as in Neoplatonic philosophy. Absolutely not. And if some sheikh was affected, then if you read a statement by a sheikh that is in general a good sheikh that was compliant with the Sharia, compliant with the deen, Sunni sheikh, you read a statement that is problematic, what do? You try to interpret it in the best possible way. You fail, what do? You go back and say to yourself that sheikh was a good sheikh. All in all, was a good sheikh. Like Ibn Taymiyyah did with Abu Yazid al-Bastami, rahimahumullah. Ibn Taymiyyah found an excuse for Abu Yazid al-Bastami for saying, Subhani, Subhani. Glory be to me, glory be to me. Because he thought that this was a spiritual intoxication. Because why? Because Abu Yazid al-Bastami in general was a Sharia-compliant, Sunni, Sharia-compliant scholar. So he was overwhelmed. And that is not to say that he's better than the Sahaba. The Sahaba are better. We didn't hear any of these statements coming from the Sahaba. The Sahaba were better. We're the best. So that is a shortcoming, but it can be forgiven because of that sort of overwhelmed by spiritual intoxication. So what you do first is try to understand it in a way that is plausible, that is good, that is Sharia compliant. If you failed, then you say, generally, that sheikh was a good Sunni, Sharia compliant sheikh, then ta'tazir anhum. Then you apologize on their behalf. And you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them for this shortcoming because of their general goodness and so on. And that is what we do all the time. If I try to understand the statement in a way that is good, that is acceptable, and if you can't, then you make istighfar for the sheikh, but you do not certainly demonize the sheikh who was otherwise good throughout their lives just because of a statement that they may have uttered in a time of spiritual intoxication or due to lack of prudence at one point or the other. Imprudence. Okay, and finally, but before we move to the last one, it is important, and we will have, inshallah, the chapter on fiqh is a little bit shorter today, so don't worry. But before we move, this ilm al-khafi, which this hidden knowledge, there is no conflict between this hidden knowledge and the apparent knowledge of the Sharia. It would be nice, and I don't know if Dr. Anjum already translated this, if it is already online, because he's working on translating Madaarij, and I think that he's done with most of it. So if you check Manzilat al-Ilm online, Station of Knowledge, and put next to it, just try to see if that Manzila was translated, because it would be very nice to go over this particular station in Madaarij As-Saalikeen by Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, because Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, being that he was at a time when there was so much corruption in the Sufi paths, and this idea of this idea of separation between Sharia and Haqiqah, this idea of separation between the apparent and the hidden or the subtle, between the interior and exterior knowledge, has become so sort of dominant, not within the scholars of Sharia for sure, whether they basically were Sufi like Ibn al-Qayyim himself or not, but in general within the masses. Those ideas started to prevail within the masses and within many Sufi denominations. So people like Ibn al-Qayyim were particularly, and any criticism that he wages against Sufism is not against Sufism, Sunni Sufism, but it is against the deviant Sufism that he had witnessed during his time. So in the beginning of this chapter, because it is the chapter about knowledge, in the beginning of this chapter, he quoted so many of the masters of the Sufi paths, starting from Abu Hafs and al-Junayd and Saqati, Sari al-Saqati, and Abu Sulaiman al-Darani, from that sort of, from the 3rd century all the way until Ibn Ata'illah, who died in the 8th century, beginning of the 8th century, and he was a contemporary of Ibn al-Qayyim. So he brought, the masters of Tasawwuf, and he quoted statements from the masters of Tasawwuf that about the importance of knowledge, how essential the knowledge of Sharia is, and how fake those people are who claim a separation between the knowledge of Sharia and the knowledge of Haqiqah, or who claim that they don't need the knowledge of Sharia because they have the knowledge of Haqiqah, which comes to them directly from Allah to their hearts. You say, you report from Mayyit, we report from al-Hayy alladhi la yamut. You report from a dead person, reporting from another dead person, and we report from the ever-living who never dies. You report from Abd al-Razzaq, or one of them said, من يحتاج إلى عبد الرزاق وهو يأتيه الكشف من الخلاق, or something like this. Who needs Abd al-Razzaq? Abd al-Razzaq, صاحب المصنف, one of the collections of the Sunnah, one of the bigger collections of the Sunnah, Musannaf Abd al-Razzaq, and who used to be a huge figure of hadith during the time of Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad traveled to the Yemen just to see Abd al-Razzaq and to learn from Abd al-Razzaq. So Imam Ahmad, Imam Ahl Sunnah al-Jama'ah, traveling to the Yemen just to see Abd al-Razzaq and to report from Abd al-Razzaq. And then some people would say, who would need Abd al-Razzaq when they can learn from al-Khallaq, from the Creator? But it would be nice if, once this is translated, inshallah, I'll send you all the statements, because that is the distinction between Sunni Sufism and heretical Sufism. That is the distinction. Respect of the Sharia, respect of the Sunnah, respect of the exterior knowledge is the distinction between Sunni Sufism and heretical Sufism. Finally, the Sheikh said, وَالدَّرَجَةُ الثَّالِثَةُ عِلْمُ اللَّدُنِّي. The 3rd level is the ladunni knowledge. And we said ladunna, min ladunna ilma, وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. We taught him from us. We taught him directly. Not through Musa, but directly. And he said, إِسْنَادُهُ وُجُودُهُ. Its reference is its existence. وَإِدْرَاكُهُ عِيَانُهُ. Its realization is through observation. Its reference is its existence. Like, I can't give you a chain of narration. My proof on this knowledge is the very existence of it. So I can't give you a chain of narration. These statements could be problematic, but you could understand them in a way that is not problematic. And that's what I said before. you could understand them in a way that's completely wholesome and not problematic. And we'll go over this. وَإِدْرَاكُهُ عِيَانُهُ, and it's realization through observation. Through observation. Eyesight. عِيَان is eyesight. وَنَعْتُهُ حُكْمُهُ, its identifiers are innate. You have to have the knowledge to know how to reach it. There is no map for it. That's what he's trying to say. نَعْتُهُ حُكْمُهُ, I can't describe it for you. I can't tell you, I can't draw a map for you and tell you how to get there. When you get there, you will know how to get there. Otherwise, there is no way. I can't really describe it, and I can't give you a roadmap. نَعْتُهُ حُكْمُهُ. You have to get there to be able to see it, experience it, understand what it is about. Its identifiers are innate. So there are no signposts to point to it. You have to get to it. And then you will be able to tell what it is and what attributes it has. Because I can't really tell you of its attributes. ليس بينه وبين الغيب بحجاب, no veil comes between it and the unseen. There is no the veil that comes between it and the unseen. We have to understand that this knowledge is the knowledge of ilham, of al-zawq, of al-kashf, a knowledge that comes to you from Allah. Ilham is what? Inspiration. Zawq is intuition. Kashf is disclosure. Do you need this knowledge for proper understanding of the deen and proper application? How many deviant people with big beards have you come by so far? Not big beards, with beards in general. Oh, of course, for you, everybody. No, that's no, that's no, sorry. Shouldn't be joking there. No, but many people that are, in fact, you know Ali Izetbegovic, the president of Bosnia. He's the philosopher president of Bosnia. He said there is nothing greater or better than iman, and sometimes so there is nothing greater or better than faith. But there is nothing dumber and more boring than some of the faithful. Some of the faithful. There is nothing greater or better than faith, but there is nothing dumber and more boring than some of the faithful. Which you can sometimes deny it. But the idea here is, remember when we talked about the means of acquisition of knowledge and the different types of knowledge? Knowledge really refines character. It is important to instill in our children the love of reading. And we need to learn about the world around us. So that is why Umar was a genius. He was aware of the world. He knew about the world. He was able to benefit Islam. We are leeches dependent on Islam. We are not bringing in any sort of benefit, value to the deen. Your understanding of the world, of intellectual trends, of sciences, all of this would help Islam. Collectively we can help Islam. So knowledge in general, acquiring knowledge in general, different types of knowledge, all kinds of knowledge, will always be helpful, will always be empowering, will always be refining. So that's where Ali Izetbegovic was coming from, to some extent. But what I'm trying to say here is, on a different note here, what I'm trying to say is, you've seen a lot of deviant people that are not basically لم يؤتوا من قبل الجهل. So they are not basically, their wickedness is not about or is not out of ignorance. When it comes to information, they have the information. When it comes to data, they possess the data and information. But their understanding is corrupted, or their application is corrupted. Why? Because the hearts are corrupted. Do you understand now the importance of that subtle knowledge that comes to the heart, that ilham, inspiration, that zawq, intuition, that kashf, disclosure, because without it, your understanding could be corrupted even though you have the information. You can compile the information. You could go use a computer program and compile all the information that you need. But your ability to put things together is impaired because your heart, is veiled. And obvious, right? And then you could have a proper understanding, fail to apply. You could have a proper understanding and fail to apply it. Just this is غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. You could have the proper understanding, but your wickedness overwhelms you. Your greed overwhelms you. So you don't honor your contracts, you don't honor your covenants, and you get overwhelmed by your wickedness or your greed. And also, even when spousal relationships, in all forms of application, in all spheres of application, you will have shortcomings because you're not getting any help, any support from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala despite having all the information. So now we understand that ilham, zawq, kashf, complement, they don't substitute. They are necessary for proper understanding and application. They complement the knowledge of Sharia, but they are not substitutes, for sure, of the knowledge of Sharia. قل قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك